Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the St. Louis podcast. I'm your glorious host today, Eric Brown, president of iMedia and partner at Mogul Holdings. Today, we have Bert terHart on the St. Louis podcast, and we're going to get into the weeds with him. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about business, but I am just fascinated by the sailing experience because I love the water. Actually, I love rivers and lakes, but the ocean scares the shit out of me. So we'll talk about that. As always, this is St. Louis Podcast each and every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. We drop an episode on all major podcasting, audio and video platforms. We meet with the most badass people and creators, talk about business, entrepreneurship, and current events. All right, let's jump into it. Bert, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to be here, and I got to say again, I'm underdressed for this. I'm feeling a little bit scruffy, so you're looking good.
I'm like suit guy. I pretty
Yeah,
much always wear a suit, so it's
yeah,
it's all right. Again, we got Bert terHart on, oceanographer, environmental advocate, accomplished blue water sailor, over 45,000 miles of open ocean sailing experience, software engineer and entrepreneur. Develop medical software used globally. I know you're also working on a new business as well. Mathematician and physicist. But the first thing, and we kind of talked about this beforehand, is with the sailing.
yeah,
Now there's a difference between sailing and then kind of really what you did because you were going
yeah,
transcontinental, correct?
there's a very big difference between the sailing trip that you're talking about. So that sailing trip was nonstop around the world
Yes.
by yourself. And because I needed to make it really hard, I didn't use any electronic navigation at all. I
Right.
used a
So
sextant.
so what was
Yeah.
the reasoning behind that? You just was that a testament towards the people back in the day?
Yeah, so
Okay.
here on the West Coast, you're never very far. If you're sailing, you're
Mhm.
never very far removed from, George Vancouver, Captain Cook, Captain Bligh, La Perouse, Bodega de Quadra. There's all this maritime history that's embedded um, in Canada, actually. Because if it weren't for those people, if it weren't for all the cartographers and explorers and map makers, Canada, of course, would be a completely different place. The same with the United States, but we have an unbelievable maritime history that's associated with Cook and associated with Bligh and associated with Vancouver. So these are the giants, basically, of oceanic hydrography. So basically, mapping the world's oceans and the islands
Yep.
and the coastlines. So when I was sailing on this coast, I mean, I have a heap of experience sailing on this coast in the wakes of those people, and I decided that I wanted to get as close to their experiences as humanly possible. And of course, the boats are different, the sails are different, the food is obviously different. But you and I can walk into the bush and turn around, and wonder where the path is, and that fear that rides, that visceral, horrible, acidic taste that rises in your mouth, and the terror that's courses
Mhm.
through your entire body is because you're lost. And that's exactly that has not changed for thousands of years, certainly tens of thousands of years. So I figured if I was going to go to sea and try to retrace their steps, because other people have sailed around the world nonstop, I would do it with a sextant, which is really hard.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the technique is not hard, but the conditions make it almost impossible. And that's how they did it. All of Canada was mapped, and the United States, for that matter. Most of the world, as a point of fact, was mapped with a sextant. In the same, it's the same technology, the same methodology.
Is the
So I figured
sextant
if
the thing that's like a U shape sort of and it has the angles on it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So that the sextant measures basically the angular height, so the angle between a star and the horizon,
Okay. Okay.
or between the sun, or the moon, or a planet, any celestial body.
Got it.
And you can tell time with it. You can tell how far east or west you are, which is what I did, which is another story in and of itself. But you can also you can navigate with it clearly,
Mhm.
north or south, east or west, and tell time. So that's how they did it, and they were unbelievably good at it. It adds a layer of complexity to what they did, and if you can. And I had a hard time getting my head around how unbelievably competent these people were at sea doing this sort of thing. And as soon as you lose sight of land, you're lost, like
Mhm.
right now, because there's no landmark. Clearly, landmark is okay. There's a mark. I'm on land. I'm going to go there. And most people are afraid of the sea, not because of the ocean per se, but because they're lost on it. Like right now, it's the same as walking into the bush and turning around, wondering where you are because you're lost. And of course, the first people, if you look at old maps, the earth is flat and sailors sail off the edge of it. And
Hmm.
it's just around the edge. It said, there be dragons,
Yep.
which is pretty much true. As soon as you're lost, it's like, there be dragons. So that's why I did it. And I'm only the ninth person in the world to have done it. It's that hard. So I was looking for a challenge. Sailing around the world is okay. That's interesting, but this is really interesting to do it with a map. And when I paddled across the country, so I started in, because you like lakes and rivers, and we haven't talked about it. I used the same. I navigated using maps and
Hmm.
and a sextant again, because that's how it was done. So I went from the Pacific coast to Atlantic coast in 2022 in a canoe solo by myself.
That's
'Cause
amazing. In a
yeah,
canoe, really? So
it,
what? So what? Did you go down Missouri, or where'd
no,
you?
I was in Canada, so I wasn't on the
Okay.
Missouri watershed. I
Okay.
was
Okay.
basically, but I mean, it would be the Missouri watershed is what Lewis and Clark did, right? So
Hmm.
they went from Missouri, eventually made their way to Columbia and the Snake and all those things. But no, a little bit farther north, and it's a different river system. Well, it's like 35 or 45 different rivers and lake and hundreds of lakes. But the route is well known because it's the old Voyageur routes across Canada, across all of Canada. But again, I used the same technology to try to get an understanding of how good these guys were. And they were so good. They're so good at that I couldn't duplicate their accuracy given all my fancy. I had a really fancy sextant, way better than theirs. Different horizon, an artificial horizon I could use as opposed to what they were using. So they were just
How
the
were
guys
they
that did
that
it.
much more efficient with it? Just because they had to be? There was no other option?
Yeah, they had to be. So I was, as an example, David Thompson. I mean, Cook spent his whole life at sea.
Hmm.
Vancouver spent his whole life at sea. So these guys were unbelievably accomplished.
Is Vancouver
Um,
the city named after him?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
Vancouver Island.
Got it. Okay.
It's so these were giants. I mean, it's interesting that you say that because we live in these places and the names we take for granted, but they're named after
Hmm.
these pretty cool people, right? Who did
Yep.
pretty cool things.
That's amazing. So when the biggest thing I would think that would be a difficulty, say just from the river system in Canada, has to be warmth, right? Not freezing to
Oh
death.
yeah, oh
Because
yeah, yeah. So I
Canada's
had
cold as hell. Like I don't even know. I don't know what the temperature is. I mean, I'm assuming you hopefully did it like over the summer, where
no,
you. No.
I
Okay.
I had to start basically in late winter to get over the Rocky Mountains.
Oh my God.
Uh,
Okay.
so and to, you're gonna laugh. So I pulled the canoe behind me
Okay.
on a
Yeah.
cart because you
Hmm.
have to go from river system to river system. All across Canada, I pulled the canoe down the highway for 1,200 kilometers, walking, pulling the 200, on a little cart, 200-pound loaded canoe to go from river system to river system. And otherwise, you're portaging with the canoe in your head like you would, normally see. But
Right. Right.
that was only like 200 kilometers. So the longest stretch that I pulled the canoe behind me was 238 kilometers. But I had to get over the Rockies. I had to get through British Columbia in late winter, early spring, so that I would have enough time so that I didn't get wintered out on the East Coast, which and winter comes early there. So I had to be finished, no later than had to be finished no later than the 1st of October, basically, to give me some chance of success. So I was being chased by winter on both sides.
Gotcha.
So the majority was in the summer, but the tough parts were in winter.
So like where you're in Antarctica or whatever, and you have a sled behind you, right? And that
Correct.
and I do some backpacking and hiking and camping and
Yeah.
things like that. So I was an Eagle Scout, so I'm out in the woods a lot. And one thing I learned that from winter hiking is that it's actually usually easier if you have snow everywhere to have a pair of skis and to
Hmm.
actually not have a backpack, but to pull it all
Yeah.
on a sled
Yeah.
behind you.
Yeah.
And I watched a video essentially explaining why that's the case. And of course, then I was like, well, that makes sense why, they
Hmm.
do that in other parts of the world as well. So I found that interesting.
Hmm.
When, so I'm curious when it comes to, you have all of that weight, right? So you have all the
Hmm.
food. So you have to be making stops and things like that, correct?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you planned out those stops. So I guess when it comes to traveling, right? So that's, I guess, one thing that they wouldn't have had that you did have, or they would have
Yeah.
had stops too in the past, but maybe not so commercialized as it is now.
Oh yeah, the people that did it, and the thing that I was trying to recreate, and specifically by following their route, and using their same navigational technology. But I had maps, so they had maps, but of course they were very crude.
Right.
But they were feeding themselves as they went. So they weren't necessarily. I mean, they would be going sometimes from fort to fort, or from trading post to trading post. But the trading posts were manned minimally,
Hmm.
and there wasn't a lot of food to go around, so you couldn't just stumble in there with a bunch of guys and then I mean, you'd get a meal, but you couldn't expect to get 30 days rations because everyone just fed themselves on the fly. So for me, and I used exactly the same technology that you used. I used pulks. I used a harness, and I was pulling the canoe behind me because that's an easy thing to do.
Hmm.
And I pulled sleds in the Arctic when I was a soldier. This is exactly what we did. We had harnesses and pulks, and everything was in the toboggan, and you pull it. And of course, that's easy as long as there's snow. So pulling this thing, so that was my strategy for those stretches where the only way to link river systems or go between lakes was on the highway, because or roads. So that was my system. Basically, I had a land. I had the non-snow version of a toboggan, which is a cart with everything in it, the canoe laying on the cart, and then pulks and a harness. The pulks are those rods that connect you to the
Hmm.
sled,
Yeah.
so it's not driving up and hitting you in the back, right?
Right.
As you well know, which
Y-
is no fun.
yes.
But
Yes.
but in terms of rations, I carried 30 days of food.
Okay.
That's almost always because my longest stretch where I couldn't go between stores or provisions was 30 days. So I just made sure I always had 30 days of food. But the sad part of that is, the sad part is that because I'm in basically in the wilderness, and there's small towns, but there's not a Costco or a mall or a Walmart in these places. So I'm
Hmm.
thinking, okay, well, how am I going to get food? Well, the only place that I knew that they would actually have was a gas station. There's a gas station in all these places, even or a convenience store.
Yep.
So I geared my entire diet around what I could get in a 7-Eleven, which isn't chips and cookies, but you can get jerky there. You can get dried meat,
Yep.
and you can usually get bread, like flatbread or something like that. You can get peanut butter and jam, and you can get oatmeal. So you can get the really, really, really basic food, but you can't just say, oh, I want gnocchi with feta and sun-dried tomatoes. It's like, no, there was none of that. And carrying all the freeze-dried food wasn't attractive to me because
It
firstly, I
gets
didn't want to
heavy.
carry around.
It gets
Pardon me?
it just gets really heavy. That's the thing about
Yeah,
food.
exactly.
Like food is just so heavy. Food and water.
Hmm.
I mean, water more so.
Yeah,
But it's heavy to carry, even if you're just
yeah,
backpacking for like 5 days. I mean,
yeah,
it's a lot of food and water you need to carry,
yeah,
let alone
yeah,
30.
yeah. So I drank. I had a Catadine, B filter, which I
Yeah.
drank out of everything, which worked great. Never had an issue with water. Sometimes the water was like brown, like wood. You couldn't see through it, but I didn't care. And then in terms of food, like you say, well, I was concerned about water, which became an issue when you're traveling in salt water. So the St. Lawrence Seaway is salt. The Fraser River, part of it is salt. All that,
Yeah, because you
East
can't
Coast stuff.
use that through a filter. I don't
No, you
yeah,
can't.
salt water
No, you
doesn't
can't do
work
it.
in those filters, yeah.
Yeah. So then I would have to be then I was carrying between four and well, basically I was trying to carry somewhere around 10 or 15 liters of water, which is 30 pounds,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And 30
That's a
days
lot.
of food is basically, it's at least 35 pounds. So right off the bat, you're at 70 pounds, which is a lot, right? Right out of the box. But yeah, that was that trip. And again, I was doing that to recreate the manner in which Canada, and again the United States, but Canada in particular, was mapped. And all this was done at the same time. So these maritime guys, the sailors like Cook and Bligh in Vancouver, they were contemporaries of Lewis and Clark. They were
Mhm.
contemporaries of Fiddler and Thompson and all these guys who mapped Canada. So it's all the same technology, all happened at the same time. So I'm basically just threading the same bits and pieces of surveying, if you will, hydrographically or on land, together at the same time using the same technology.
Did you find anything new? Like,
Um,
like an animal or an insect or just anything like that that maybe
no,
wasn't mapped before? No?
no, no. I mean, it is interesting in that regard because the rivers are changing all the time.
Mhm.
So you're basically looking at something new every year, but well, maybe not new is the right way to say it. Maybe novel, but there's no new species. But I saw things I'd never seen before, animals I'd never seen before, which are typically very reclusive,
Mhm. Yep.
which is very cool. And of course, you have experiences with wildlife that you've never had before, like a bear coming in the tent. That is, I've never had that. So those things are new.
You had a bear
But
come in your tent?
I had a bear come in the tent. Yeah,
Was it black or
um,
brown bear?
I was a black bear. Right.
Okay.
So and you're asked because you know the difference. So
Yeah, did you
me
try and
too.
scare it away? Were you big
Oh
and
yeah.
loud? Yeah.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Uh-huh.
And of course, luckily he took off. I was just in his way basically. I was kind of very close to the shoreline and very close to the brush line. So bears walk shorelines in the morning,
Yep.
and he just decided it was easier for him to go through my tent than it was to go around or go for a swim. So
That
lazy bear. I
yeah,
think I ran into the only lazy bear in all of Canada.
that's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
bears are nerve-wracking because I've done a lot of hiking in bear country and never come across one.
Mhm.
But I'm always concerned. It's like, okay, sure, I got some bear spray, but I'm like, I know it's effective, but at the same time, I mean, it's only so effective. Like a
Mhm.
bear is if the bear wants to hurt you, bear's gonna hurt you
Yeah.
regardless of bear spray. Did you carry a gun when you were traveling?
No,
No?
I
Okay.
didn't. No, this next trip I'm going to have to carry a gun. But this trip that trip I didn't carry a gun. I mean, firstly, um um the laws in Canada where you go
Yeah,
when
Canada's a
you go
little
through.
weird with those, yeah.
Yeah, so and it becomes the problem's exacerbated if you're going through provincial and national parks because they have different rules and every province is different.
Mhm.
So that just made it impractical, and the chances of running into a brown bear were very slim. Running into a black bear is a different issue, but basically they're typically the black bears are well acclimatized to humans. So if you're acting like a human, that's a pretty good thing. So you're making lots of noise, you're managing, where your food is, all the things you would have learned, in scouting. The same thing. I
Mhm.
never got to that level by any stretch, but it's just common sense. So if you start acting like a food item, like imagine smearing yourself in honey and laying in the bush,
Right.
that's probably not going to turn out well. Most humans don't do that. So behave like a human, and you're pretty good. Like I mean, I was fly fishing with my brother on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and on a stretch of about 200 yards, there was 11 black bears fishing in the same stretch, and they don't care about you at all. I mean, there's literally one, a great big male walked past my brother, and he could have reached out and petted him, and he just didn't care because there was so much food around there that you're just an annoyance.
Mhm.
But I can only imagine if you decided you were going to wrestle the fish out of the bear's mouth, like then that's not going to work out very well for you. So
Well,
as long as and there was other people there too. Eventually, there was a bunch of First Nations people who came along, and they were fishing in the same pool, but they were acclimatized to people being around there. It was relatively close to the highway, so it wasn't a big deal. But again, the point is, it wasn't a brown bear or grizzly, and so it's a completely different creature. And I've been in Alaska, sailing into Alaska, um, again for citizen science type reasons, but we were in a we were around the Kodiak brown bears, and those are, I mean, it's the size of a horse. So you got to pay attention. And in the spring when I was there, they were eating grass in the estuary, so they didn't care about me at all,
yeah.
at all. Anybody that was there, they were just eating grass, and it was mothers and cubs. And the only time they would get annoyed is when there was a male would show up, a male bear. Then they would all scatter.
Mm.
But if you showed up in the same river system later in the year when there's lots of salmon, then again they wouldn't care. But in those times where and they're not well acclimatized to humans. So if you were to show up in those regions at a time when they're really hungry, and
That's a
it
bad
would be a
problem for
different
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you got a problem. So
Have you seen that video online of I don't know what river system they're in. I would think it's in Canada,
yeah,
but they have all those brown bears. There's like
yeah.
20 of them in the video and everyone's just taking photos. There's like 10, 15
Oh,
people.
oh
I'm like,
yeah,
that's amazing.
I know exactly. I know exactly where those pictures are being taken because it's in the Kuzmatine.
Okay.
Typically, it's Kuzmatine, and I know the guys. I know the boat and the guys who would take those, because you can only get there by boat, and they take a small dinghy basically up the estuary, and you could literally just lob a pebble at them. You're that close, and they just don't care. So,
Yeah, there's so
but
much
yeah,
food. Yeah.
there's so much food, and they're only interested in one thing only. And that's a good time to be around those bears, is when they're not interested in you and they're interested in one thing and one thing only. Like a really good, if you haven't seen the documentary or the film Grizzly Man, it's worth watching, because yeah, I won't give anything away, because I
Grizzly
probably
man.
couldn't do it justice in this thing. But Grizzly Man, if you're interested in in the behavior of bears and
Hmm.
how bears interact with humans, and in particular these Kodiak brown bears. So it's worth watching. It really is worth watching, especially if you're at all interested in being in bear country and how that works. Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty cool.
people definitely need to be aware. So the other thing is like mooses, right?
Hmm.
Or meese? Is it meese? Multiple moose?
Moose.
Okay, that's what I thought. I don't know
Yeah,
where I got
it's
meese from.
it's it's like moose
So
are way more dangerous than bears.
that's what I'm that is so
Yeah,
exactly right. So did you
yeah.
ever come across any moose?
Never in rutting season.
Okay,
So
okay.
yeah, the males. I mean, you see them in the rivers all the time when they're eating. Certainly in the swamps and the low parts of lakes, they're always around. But in mating season, then the males are, when they're rutting, they're
Mhm.
incredibly dangerous, because you are in their anything in their territory that they can scare away, then they'll scare you away. So, and they're more than happy to do it. So, getting attacked by there's more people who are attacked by moose than there are bears. Just
Yeah, that doesn't
and by I
surprise
mean,
me. Yeah.
yeah, and it doesn't mean that it's fatal, because lots of bear attacks aren't fatal. I mean, I mean, certainly a significant number of them are, and they're all tragic. Certainly by no matter how you want to measure it, but yeah, moose are incredibly dangerous animals, and they're big, like they are huge,
Yep.
and they get
Mhm.
hyper aggressive.
I don't
And you could run into your car and close the door, and and if the car didn't leave, it would attack it until basically it killed itself. They're that incensed and infuriated by your presence in their territory.
I think the first time I ever saw one was when I went to Yellowstone,
Hmm.
and right next to the car, and I was like, this creature's amazing. Like,
Yeah,
if you haven't seen a moose, like, in person, it's like you wouldn't understand how big that thing is.
yeah.
It's taller than the car.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Taller
It's
than the
way bigger
car.
than a car.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's amazing, and then obviously you get underneath it, it starts stomping you.
Hmm.
That's a big problem. Big
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
So, okay,
yeah.
so you traveled the river system in Canada, and then you're like, "Let's go ocean."
No, it was
It
the
was
other
the
way
other
around
way
first.
around. Okay.
Yeah, 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 other way
Okay.
around.
So which one was harder? Which one was the most difficult to do? I would assume the ocean.
Well, it's because they were wildly different,
That
and
yep.
mentally, I think that the canoe trip was harder, because the pace is relentless. It was 7,800 kilometers. What does that translate to? 80. It's like 5,500 miles,
Mhm.
something like that. And I had a very short period of time to do it. And I figured if I took no days off, like 0 days off, I might make it if I averaged 25 miles a day.
That's what I was gonna say. I did some
Yeah.
math. Yeah, about
And then,
27 miles.
of
That's
course,
insane.
it's impossible to do that. So the very first day that you don't make 25 miles, I'm already thinking I'm late.
Yep.
And of course you get weathered out all the time. It rained. It rained 9 out of 10 days for the whole trip. That doesn't mean it rained 24 hours,
Sure.
but it rained at some period in those 24 hours when I was. And so sometimes you're blown off the river. Sometimes you're weather bound. You just can't move. Sometimes there's so much portaging you can't do it. So as soon as I stopped, it didn't matter if I'd paddled for 14 or 15 hours. It didn't make any difference. As soon as I stopped and the weather was good, I'd think I got to go again. I have to, because I'm behind. I'm behind. I'm behind. I'm behind. So that takes a huge toll on you mentally. Like there's never a moment's mental rest. So eat as fast as you can, break camp, make and break camp as fast as you can, paddle as hard as you can, and just do that for almost 7 months. And that took a mental, and I was unprepared for that. I never thought that I would be so mentally, well, I guess it's worn out or exhausted, because that just takes a huge toll on you physically if you're constantly worrying about that.
Yeah. Yep.
And of course, the diet isn't that great. I'm eating out of 7-Eleven. It's very difficult to find a place to stay, because there isn't. I mean, most of the it's very hard to find a place to stay. Like, where am I going to pitch the tent tonight? And you know better than I'm sure, or at least as well as I, if because you have as much more backpacking experience than me. So, and Eagle Scouting would teach you all these skills. So as soon as the most important thing is finding shelter, you can go without
Ye
food for a long time and
Yep.
water for a long
Mhm.
time, but you need shelter. As soon as you stop, of course, you're sweating like a dog or like a pig or whatever, whichever one sweats the most. That was me.
Yep.
So you need shelter like right now. And if you get blown off the lake or you can't get around the rapids or you're weather bound, you need a place that where you can actually be warm enough to survive. And that's no mean feat. Like that's hard because it's a cold, miserable country, and just about anywhere in Canada and about anywhere, any time of the year, if you're not properly sheltered, I mean, it could be it could be the end of you literally in 24 hours or less. So it's a big deal, and
Yeah,
being wet is a big
hypothermia
deal.
would be the main thing I'd be worried
Yeah,
about the whole time.
yeah, because you're wet, right? You're
Right,
constantly wet,
right,
and it
yep.
was the same in like well, I remember when I was sailing, being in the Southern Ocean, and just praying. I was just hoping that someday in my life in the future I'm going to be warm again, because the inside of the cabin is, I mean, everything is wet. I have no heat in the cabin. Anything, the boat is mostly underwater in the storms,
Mhm.
so you're soaking wet, and eventually, long enough, the inside of the boat is wet and it's cold. The inside of the cabin is like 35 degrees. Between the closest was about 36 or 37 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're cold, and you're cold like that for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And to give you some idea of what that means, my caloric intake in the Southern Ocean was about 8,000 calories a day.
Wow.
Most of
Holy
the
shit.
most of the Yeah,
That's a
exactly.
lot that's a lot of calories. Oh my god. So you're
And
putting out work. That's a
yeah,
lot of work
because
on a daily basis.
it's a lot of work, and a lot of that is just trying to stay warm. I mean, sailing the boat is hard work, but it's a little bit anaerobic. You got to get out there, raise the sail, lower a sail. You got to do this or you got to do that, and then then it's over. It's like a sprint, and then it's over. And the rest of the time is like, how am I going to stay warm? What can I dry out today in some way, shape, or form? So, yeah, there's unique challenges to avoiding hypothermia in both cases. But
What are like
see
your
on
favorite products? I'm curious. Like
oh
what were your most useful tools that you had?
my clothing in both instances. I
Okay.
spent more on clothing than the clothing I wore sailing was almost as expensive as the sails itself, because
So
it's
how'd you
so
layer?
important.
How'd you layer for that? I'm curious.
Okay, so underneath I always wore merino, always
Mhm.
always always merino.
Yep.
And then if it was really cold, I had 2 layers of merino, and then over top of that I had some very expensive fleece, and
Mhm.
over top of that I had three different sorts of sets of rain gear. Sort of I had splash gear, and then rain gear in the terms of wet weather gear, and then I had something you could stand in front of a fire hose under, and it wouldn't make any difference.
Gotcha.
And you needed all three, because as soon as you get outside, you're going to get wet, because you're sailing, bombing along, and it's in the middle of the ocean, so the waves aren't small by any stretch, and you're going to get splashed, which with salt water, which never dries, right? Because there's salt in it.
Yep.
It's salt is hygroscopic. So I always made sure when I was going outside that I had one of those sets of rain gear on. But when it got really cold, that would be it: 2 layers of merino, a layer of fleece, and then some rain gear over top of that. And I used
I think
again
people
the clothing.
usually underestimate that.
Oh
I
God,
find
yeah.
it all the time.
Oh
If
God,
it's
yeah.
even if it's like going out skiing with people, it's like you don't okay, you don't have to spend a lot of money on clothing, but you should at least have the right stuff. Like I'll go or even backpacking, they're wearing
Yeah.
cotton, and it's like, 28 degrees outside. I'm like, you're gonna be freezing shortly. You're
Yeah.
going to be freezing because eventually you're gonna sweat.
Hmm.
That cotton that's around your body is going to get wet. It's not going to dry, and then you are cold forever.
Forever. Yeah. So, and that once you get cold, it's almost impossible to get warm again,
Mhm.
especially if you're backpacking, especially if the conditions are challenging. And as soon as you start to get cold, then the amount of the amount of physical energy, of course, but the mental energy that goes into that will eventually lead you to making some very bad decisions. So, and a good example of that is, speaking of, cold, is that one of the ways to avoid making bad decisions is to ensure that you're warm and
Mhm.
dry as humanly possible, and then you get enough sleep. So everything bad happens between between 3 and 4 in the morning.
Yep.
That's when you fall overboard. That's when you shouldn't be paddling down the river. That's so I made sure. The only thing I was the only thing that I shouldn't say that. I was adamant about trying to be asleep between 3 and 4 because I couldn't afford to be. If you, I can make one bad decision,
Yeah, and
and
that's
that's
it.
basically all I was allowed.
Hmm.
It's like climbing Everest. How many bad decisions can you make? Doing that sort of thing.
See,
You know,
there's one thing that makes no sense to me is climbing Everest. I don't get it. Like I don't
yeah,
get
me neither.
I understand like the appeal being like the highest peak, but then you watch it, it's like everyone's standing in a line.
Hmm.
You're literally climbing over dead climbers on the way
Hmm.
up and on the way back. It's like I don't know. There's something
Yeah,
about it where it just feels a little I don't even know the word. It's just odd. It's just odd.
yeah, yeah. I couldn't. I'm in your boat.
I
I
would
mean,
never wanna do that.
yeah,
Even if someone is like, "Here's $1,000,000, go climb Everest." I'm like, "No. No, I don't wanna do
no,
that." I would
yeah,
never wanna do that. Absolutely not. I like the cold. I don't like the cold that much. 'Cause that would be freezing the whole time. Even
yeah,
with those massive jumpsuits that they have, the massive down suits that they have, even then,
yeah,
you're getting high. I'm like, I just then you gotta bring up oxygen. You're essentially dying when you're over 12,000 feet, or is it 12,000 meet? Whatever it is, the death
yeah,
zone. So
yeah.
it's like I don't know. That's a lot. Whereas like doing rivers and things like that, or even sailing the ocean sounds way more interesting
Hmm.
than climbing Everest. So I'm
Well,
go-
I think I have no interest I've done lots of mountaineering out of necessity because again Army things, but
right,
and
right.
it's I like climbing. I like scrambling and climbing and that sort of thing. But I could never stand in a line with a bunch of other people on a piece of rope, you know, walking up. Literally, I mean, Everest is basically a very stiff walk, a hard walk, a couple of technical sections, but
Hmm.
none of that appeals to me with 35 other guys and the conditions in which you have to survive. None of that seems worth it by any stretch. And I think one of the things that people get wrong about adventure, certainly, and about exploration is think you have to do something exotic and extreme, and it just isn't that way.
Right.
You can is if you're willing to step outside your front door with an open heart, then you'll find all the adventure you need. As long, but you have to look for it. You have to be prepared, to be enthralled by the miracles that are around you. Like just walking into the forest. If you just walk into the forest and stop,
Hmm.
like here on, if you walk into, it's when people are completely amazed when they go to Sequoia National Forest on the West Coast in California
I
because the trees
just
are
was
just,
there in November.
yeah, it's just
First time, the
yeah,
trees. There's
yeah,
so there is something about when you live in a city and then you go to a place like that. It's it's like I don't know, it like fills you up with something that you normally do
yes,
not have.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
not even something you can put your finger on, right? It's just like
mhm,
it's now bigger than you, and especially when it comes to Sequoia. I mean, that
yeah.
place is amazing. But I did the West Coast. I did
Oh, you did,
PCH in November. Yeah.
yeah,
I didn't hike. I drove. I
yeah.
didn't do much hiking, but yeah, I went from all the way up to Sequoia. I stayed at some small inn in Klamath.
Oh, I know
Uh
where that is. Yeah, yeah,
what's the inn called? Because that place was amazing. But yeah, I was up in Klamath, and then went all the way to San Diego and stopped
yes,
in all the
beautiful.
places in between. But I hit
Yeah,
all the national parks and all the parks, and
yeah,
I was like, the big trees. I went with
yeah.
a couple friends, and the lady I was with was like, "You are going to be amazed." And you
That's
look up
right.
photos online, just like I was saying before, of a
Yeah,
moose, but it's like then you get there and you're like,
yeah,
oh my god, oh
yeah,
my god," and you feel something. You feel
yeah.
something. You're like, it's just a good feeling. You're like, I am now with nature. And that
Yeah,
sounds, I don't know, that sounds a little cheesy, but it's like all of the stresses of like the bullshit in the city are now left behind.
mhm.
You're not having to
Well,
worry about work or anything like that. It's like be a part of what's happening right now. And it seems like it's a lot easier to do that in those areas than it is sitting on like the porch of your house, for example.
yeah. So I think there, man. I'm so glad that you talked about that because I'm just completely on board with it. So imagine that you drove through Sequoia National Park and never got out of the car,
Yeah, why?
which
That's
which
insane.
which hundreds of thousands of people do. But as soon as you get out of the car, get out of the car, close the door behind you, step out there with an open heart. It's like, holy effing, fill in appropriate
Yep.
long list of
Yep.
profanity,
No, all of those profanities, yes,
all of those
correct.
things. And you, the first thing that happens is like, it's amazing. It's shockingly beautiful. And then you realize right away that there's probably something bigger than you, and clearly it's a
Mhm.
tree in front of you, but then there's something else, underlying that. And that is scale invariant, because you could look at a leaf on a tree and just wonder how in,
Yep, how in the
again,
hell?
large
Yep.
long list of profanity,
Yeah.
does that work? Like, how does this little, like, all of that giant sequoia is fueled by a leaf. So you don't have to, so you're of course shocked by the scale of what you see, but you can scale that down and just be amazed, amazed, amazed. And you said it earlier. Did you see anything new? An insect. Imagine you discover something as tiny as an insect, and it's like
Yep.
suddenly your whole world just explodes. And that's literally at your feet every single day. I mean, there's lots of undiscovered things around us. I mean, they're small, like bacteria and things like that, but still
Mhm.
they're still new in every way, shape, and form. And it's like we're surrounded by this shocking beauty. And certainly when you're at sea, you get the same feeling you get when you're, in Sequoia National Forest, or anywhere that there's giant trees, anywhere there's, original rainforest, because we have big trees here in, on the West Coast, but not like that, of course, but still big. And you're at sea, you have the same sort of feelings and view of immensity. So the first time you see a wave that's the height of a 7-story building bearing down on you, then you suddenly realize that, you know this might be interesting. So
Yeah, how'd you handle stuff like that? Like, I would be concerned, like, number 1, I'd be concerned about, like, capsizing. So, did you
yeah.
bring, like, a Garmin or something with you in case you had an issue you could call for help?
Yeah, I had a satellite tracker that, so
Okay.
you could follow me in real time. So if something bad happened, then I just didn't sail off the ends. I just didn't sail into oblivion. But firstly, you have to have absolute and total faith in everything that in the boat, in the gear, in
Mhm.
everything,
Mhm.
because your life is depending on it. Like, you would never go for, like you just said a few minutes ago, dude, you're wearing cotton. We need to go home now, because half an hour from now you're gonna be a popsicle, and I'm going home with you,
Yep,
and
exactly.
or I'm leaving you on the side of the trail and picking you up. So we're not
Exactly.
doing it. So you have to have faith in this in those things that you're actually, pinning your life on. So if you don't have absolute faith in the boat, then you can't go, because the mental energy that you'll expend wondering if the boat's going to come apart beneath you is going to drive you insane. So I was lucky enough to have a very very a boat I knew extremely well, so I had absolute faith in the boat, and the boat would keep me alive. The boat is way tougher than me. I mean, you can sail it to bits in the same way that you can, get in your car and mat it out and just drive down the highway flat out, and eventually something's going to explode, right? So
Yep, yep.
you can do the same thing with a sailboat. You can put everything up and, go- raise your fist to the wind and, swear in the face of Mother Nature, but none of that's going to turn out well for you. So, and then you have to have you the clothes that you wear are it's your last resort, because there's lots of instances of people's boats who've capsized, things have come apart, and now they're living inside the upside down boat in a
Yep.
pool of water,
Mhm.
and the only thing saving their story, behind, is the clothing. It's a dry suit or something like an immersion suit. So you simply cannot ignore the clothing that you have if you're going to do these extreme things, and every penny you spent on that stuff, and it's expensive, is worth it, because it's your last line of defense. So you have to have absolute confidence in your gear, which runs right down to, the socks on your feet, because you're going to be putting you know putting your feet into a boot full of water and walking around for the next 8 hours in it.
Yep.
um, yeah, I can tell. I can see that nod on your
Yep.
face. You know
I
exactly what that
know, I
is,
know
right?
all
This,
about that, yeah.
yeah.
So, sadly, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, I went to Buckskin Gulch, which
Okay.
is a little bit north of the Grand Canyon. I believe it's the longest slot canyon in the United States,
Okay. Wow.
and I
Wow.
was doing it in November. So, during the day, it was warm, but at night, it was cold,
Hmm.
and this was one of the first trips I had taken in a long time, kinda going by myself, well, with a couple other people, but I was kind of the one being responsible for everything, and, I have So this is kind of when I first started really doing backpacking. I don't know, maybe this was already like 6 or 7 years ago, maybe even 8 now. And, I had everything lined up, right, as far as staying cold is, especially at night, because sun goes down, you have the wind, and of course, in the desert, it gets cold as hell at night. And of course, the jacket I forget to bring was my down jacket. Now,
Oh,
that means that the only other jacket I had was my soft shell, which
okay.
essentially produces no warmth. Other than
Hmm.
that, I had a, merino wool, and then had like a fleece layer. That's
Hmm.
all I had. And let me tell you, at night, it was the most miserable thing every
Yeah,
single night. And of course, if you're
yeah,
cold at night, you sleep bad. It it didn't ruin the trip, but it made the trip a lot harder than it needed to be. And that was a
exactly right.
learning lesson because I had it, I looked through everyone's bag. I was like, I packed this, I packed this. Of course, 5 days later, we get back to the car. It's sitting right there in the car, right next to where my bag was. I just didn't put it into the back because I was
Yeah,
rushing. We were rushing, right? Like you're saying
yeah,
before, we were behind. I knew we had to get there before sun was down to set camp and do everything else. And of course, we rushed out of the car instead of taking an extra 5 minutes just to make
right.
sure that we had absolutely everything. So there's just a lot of learning experiences when it comes to doing stuff like that. That moving forward, now you hope that you don't have that issue again. And of
Yeah,
course, you teach other people that as well. It's like, all right, even though you packed it, hey, make sure, especially from a standpoint of like food, water, clothes, like
yeah,
do you have everything in here before you
yeah.
actually aren't going to be back at the car for 5, 7 days or whatever it is,
Hmm.
because there's no helping you once you're out there.
Yeah, you're on your own. Yeah, I learned that in the army because we always had someone else was checking everything. Like when we
Right.
were doing something that was critical, then I would pack my stuff, and then somebody else would check my
Hmm.
pack, and I check his. Because you look at your pack, everything like you said, I know I packed it, because you should, but then no, you didn't. And then I
Yep.
look at that, I go, where's your down jacket, dude? It's like, no, I packed it. It's like, no, no, you didn't pack it,
Yep.
because you have this blindness, right? And being in a hurry, man. I mean, it is a killer. So everything you can do to be like, and sailing is a really good example of that. So the boat I sailed around the world was 45 feet long. So it's not a big boat by oceanic standards, because people sail bigger boats, but it's a big enough
Decent
boat.
size. Yeah.
Yeah. So as soon as you get behind the boat, it's ahead of you. Like you're playing catch up. You got too much sail on, or the course is not right given the weather conditions. Then you're in a world of hurt, because I can't play catch up. Like the sheet loads, for example, the load on a rope for a normal sail is 3,000 pounds. So if you're behind that, and you somehow screw something up, there's no way you can just go out there and hang on to it with one hand, like you're doing something else with the other. Like, no, it's a Volkswagen doesn't weigh 3,000 pounds.
Yep.
So, so you can't get behind that. You got to be ahead of everything. And it's the as soon as you get in a hurry, like you said, you're behind the clock. You got to make camp before it gets dark and all these things. Then, man, it can be a recipe for disaster if you don't have your head screwed on right. And one of the first things to realize is that you are behind. And then as crazy as it sounds, the smart thing to do is to slow down
Yep.
and make sure that, okay, all right, before I run, I'm going to
Hmm.
walk. I'm going to make sure everything is good. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. Okay, then I can pour on the coals.
You really have to be observant and really
Hmm.
think through what you're doing,
Hmm.
especially when you're out doing stuff like that. Because like you rush one wrong move, and that could be detriment, right? That could
Yeah.
be the end of the trip,
Hmm.
or you're in trouble. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's this. Well, we used to call it situational awareness.
mhm.
So no matter where you are, what you're doing, you have to, as soon as you have the blinders on,
That's tough to
then,
train though. That's
oh,
that's
no, it's like you say, that's tough to learn, right?
it's yeah, it's like you almost just have to do it.
Hey there, St. Louis podcast listeners. We've got some exciting news from our friends over at Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Lee of Farmers Insurance.
Mhm.
If you're looking for a job or to own your own business under a brand that everyone and their cousin is familiar with, Mark Lee with Farmers Insurance of St. Louis is recruiting insurance agency owners here in St. Louis for their Farmers Insurance Mentorship Program.
And as many of you are aware, Garrett and I have owned quite a few successful and award-winning businesses over the years, and in a past life, one of those was a farmers insurance agency out of Chesterfield, Missouri.
Eric and I know firsthand how hard it is to start a business under a brand that no one has heard of and convince consumers and businesses to trust that you're an authority figure in your industry.
And as many of you know, we own an award-winning marketing firm, Vi Media, the one that Garrett was just discussing. And building that company's reputation literally took years. We're still building it to this day, and it's been 8 years in the making. However, with the Trusted Farmers Insurance Agency name on the building, we got started when we started our farmers insurance agency. The trust was already built and has been for 96 years.
And if you can't do math, that means Farmers Insurance has been around since 1928. Luckily, you don't need to be a human calculator to get rich as an owner of your very own Farmers Insurance Agency.
Nope. All you have to do is reach out to the one and only Mark Lee, the leader of farmers insurance in the greater St. Louis metropolitan area.
That's right. So ensure he continues to sponsor our show and your favorite podcast, the St. Louis Podcast, by quitting your job today and calling Mark Lee. I wouldn't even wait for him to answer your call. Call your boss now, quit, and become your very own business owner.
Visit insurancecareerstl.com. That is insurancecareerstl.com. Should we spell it out?
Yes. It would
INSURANCE, career, CAREER, STL.com, insurancecareerstl.com. Go there now. Back to the podcast.
And wait, insurancecareerstl.com.
Back to the podcast. And then learn from it. So when you were in the military, I'm curious, what you've done. It sounds like you've done a lot of different stuff in the military with mountaineering and stuff. Were you in a specific unit that handled that type of stuff?
Well, I was in the Canadian Special Service Force.
Okay.
So it would be the equivalent of it's basically a cross between your Delta Force, and the Green Berets. So we were the guys, dressed up like a bush, jumping out of an airplane, first in, last out kind of thing, doing, small groups of guys doing interesting things in interesting places.
So were you guys doing a lot of like extractions and things like that? And I guess taking out high profile targets, stuff like that?
So, I mean, we because we were Canadians, we're very polite. So we weren't, we weren't in the same sort of theaters that the U.S. was at the same time. But we were training in the same way. And I'm very happy to say that I was never called upon to do anything like that. And when I got out and went to graduate school, the unit that I had that I was in was posted to Bosnia Herzegovina doing all the things that the U.S. was doing when they were there. But it just so happened that I was in the Army for just over 10 years, and it just so happened that in that time frame, I was in military college for the first 4. Then after that was 6 and change, and we were never called upon to do that sort of thing. But that's what we trained with every day. We trained with the Delta Force guys. We trained with the British Small Boat Service and SAS. We trained with Australians doing the same thing, and of course. I went to all the bases that the Americans were at. So, and who were doing that sort of training. So it was when you're young, it's just this one giant adventure. It's just fantastic. You're jumping out of everything and you're asked to do these really, really hard things. And it was just great. But, I really wanted to go to sea because I wasn't supposed to be in the Army. So, anyway, yeah.
So, I'm curious, kind of off topic, but on this topic, there's been a lot of, I feel like just media and podcasts related about like Navy SEALs and stuff coming on and almost glorifying like these war stories and stuff, which I don't, telling a story is one thing, but it almost seems like some of these operators coming on podcasts now, they're getting huge views. And it's almost glorifying, the missions that they did. And it just comes off a little weird to me. I'm almost like, are you paid by the U.S. government to try and get people to come into service right now? I don't know. It feels disingenuous. It's like, yeah, you're a badass, but badass meaning like you did like badass shit. Like you're 0.1 or 0.01% of the military, right? And what you did is stuff that most people, almost everyone's not capable of doing. but
Hmm.
then you come on a podcast and glorify it. It feels odd to me. I use that word
Well,
odd again. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Have you seen those?
yeah, yeah, I've seen them, and I'm completely on board with you. And I don't. The thing is, um, I can tell you that there isn't a soldier that really wants that really wants to go to war. And if they
Right.
are, they shouldn't be in the service,
Mhm.
because it's a very very deadly game, and the chances of you coming out on the other side are coming out whole
Mhm.
is very very low, especially in the modern battlefield,
Yep.
which we're getting a sense of, as you look around the world. And
Yeah, watching
no,
Ukraine is crazy
yeah, so
with the
it's
drones and
crazy.
everything. I Oh my
Yeah,
god.
it's like nuts. And the thing is, for the guys that have done it, they've just done it, and it's part of their story. It's what they've done. It's what they've trained. So I the thing that's glorifying it is it's not them telling it. It's someone retelling it.
Right.
So it's like this as an example, the sailing trip around the world. Like that's a very rare thing. I'm only the ninth person in the world to do it, but I don't. And I did it, so I can't help. I can't help that I did it, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. And I don't think it's. I don't think I managed it because I'm persistent. I snuck around the world. I didn't sail around the world. I snuck around the world because I was out there. I hope I got there and back before Mother Nature realized I was there and taught me a proper lesson.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
and I've had people come and tell me, oh, I need heavy weather sailing experience, so I'm gonna sail into the North Pacific in the middle of winter. I just look at them and say, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Like you're just stupid. And if you want to find trouble, just go stand in the highway and dodge cars. It's the same sort of thing. It'll give you the same thrill. But to go out, none of these guys are going out willfully. I mean, there's the challenge of the training. Like that I can understand. It's the same like who runs a marathon? Why do you do that?
Right.
It's the marathon is 3 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever it might be, 5 6 hours, but you trained for months and years and years, so something is motivating you beyond just the race.
Mhm.
And it's the same. It's the same. I mean, I can speak for myself and most of the other guys that I know that were doing it at the time, similar sorts of things, that they just loved the training. They loved the process of what they were engaged in. The actual thing that they were going to be asked to do, nothing nice about that at all. Nothing nice about it at all. So, um,
Do running marathons and stuff like that, I've never understood like you said, the process and things like that, but I'm like, I'd much rather go out and hike and backpack and
yeah, same.
have the views and take it in versus go run, 20 miles in downtown St. Louis.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
that's just me, to each their own. I'm glad
Yeah,
we
I
have
mean,
people that can run marathons. It's pretty incredible. I would die. I know I couldn't do it right now.
well, I'm impressed by the process. So in order
Mhm.
for you to be, I mean, I'll say unabashedly, in order for you to be successful at anything, you have to be completely divorced from the outcome,
Mhm.
because the outcome lies in the future. You have no idea what that is. And if you're divorced from the outcome, the only thing that you can actually be embedded in is the process. So anyone that's engaged in something that requires living, fully living in the process and engaging with the process has my attention. So someone who's willing to do a marathon, then okay, the race is one thing, sure, that's the outcome. But unless you're engaged in the process fully and completely and committed to that, I mean, people get committed to their passions all the time, and I love that. And I think life would be awfully hollow if you weren't committed to your passions, whatever they might be. But the outcome of that is something completely different than being embedded in the process of actually achieving the outcome. And business is exactly the same way. I guarantee you that if you sat down and said, here's my business plan, I want to make $100,000 a month. I said, well, how are you going to do that? Well, it doesn't matter. I'm just getting, that's the only thing I care about is making the money.
Yeah.
The chances of you actually succeeding, I'll give you a big fat zero,
Mhm.
and be absolutely sure that that's going to happen. But I'm more interested in someone, like I guess maybe the extreme example of that would be Elon Musk trying to go to Mars, to build despite what you might think about Elon and all the things, I don't care about that.
Yep.
But but he's completely and totally, his entire being is aligned with that idea and that project. And he doesn't care how many rockets he blows up along the way, because think of the failures that he's enduring on worldwide. Everyone's watching him blowing up rockets as they leave the launch pad or try to catch them or land in the ocean. I don't care. And he may not get there in his lifetime, and there's a possibility, right? but he's passionate about that. He's completely and utterly engaged in the process. And I think historically, probably the best example of that is the United States getting to the moon.
Hmm.
They had no idea how they were going to do it. They were just going to, and that was the goal, and they were just going to make it happen somehow. But if they hadn't been completely embedded in the process, there's no way they would have done it.
Yeah, my
So I think it's,
grandfather worked at McDonnell Douglas,
yeah,
and during
wow,
Mercury and the one before Mercury, not Apollo, Gemini. I
yeah.
think it was
Well,
Gemini.
yeah, it was Gemini. It was sorry, Mercury, Gemini, and then Apollo.
Yeah, so he worked on Mercury and Gemini, and
Yeah.
we got a photo at my house of all of the McDonnell Douglas guys. He was a machinist.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah,
His stories.
oh my
Yeah.
God, incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And you know, going to the so do you think that's the problem now? Do you think that's why we haven't been back? Is because we were now that I'm thinking about it, I've always been so I'm not going to say I'm a conspiracy guy. We didn't go to the moon. I think we did go
Mhm,
to the moon. But
mhm.
also the longer it takes for us to go back, the more I think, did we actually get there 60 years ago? Because how the hell have we not been back since?
Yeah.
Technology has advanced so much. How have we not been able to go back since? But then you kind of hit on something. We were so dedicated on getting to space. We all had one goal, and that was
Hmm.
the goal. But now it's not important, really. It doesn't seem like
Hmm.
it's important to go back to the moon.
Hmm.
And so therefore we don't have a bunch of people striving towards that one thing.
Hmm.
Maybe that's a part of the problem. Or maybe that
Well,
is the whole problem.
I think when the U.S. decided to go to the moon, there was nothing else. Like when I was in science, as an example, out of my own autobiography again, I was doing theoretical stuff, and people were saying, people would come up to me and say, "What are you doing? What's it worth?" And I'd say nothing,
Mhm.
because it's really worth nothing. I have no idea how this bunch of equations could potentially be used. And at the time, we were the pretty much the first group of scientists trying to couple. Well, that's what we were working on. I shouldn't say we were the first, but we were working on coupling the ocean and the atmosphere, which is a very difficult problem. And everyone
What do
knows
you
what
mean
that
by
is
that?
today. Well, um, the ocean is a giant is a giant heat source.
Okay, yep.
So it's constantly heating the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is weather as you know it.
Yes. Okay, got it,
So we
got it.
had atmospheric, we had 3D sort of pseudo turbulent models of the atmosphere and weather, and we had those for the ocean, which is what I was working on, but marrying them, because everything happens at the boundary. At the boundary of anything, you have all this friction. But
Mhm.
far away from the boundary, it's sort of stable and steady state. But the more you bring these two systems together, that's where everything interesting happens. And the people hadn't done it yet. We had these two separate systems, but we weren't able to marry them.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
and it's a very difficult problem. It was being solved mathematically, of course. With guys with pens and paper, and then guys with at the time, of course, there weren't computers everywhere. We were using we were actually we'd have to book the Cray supercomputer running out of Boulder, Colorado, and Colorado Springs.
Yep.
Um, 8 or 9 months in advance. So because your program would run for 8 hours, and today it's basically that you can do it on a smartphone. So it was way back when, like this is, I think dinosaurs roamed the earth. If I looked out my office, Brontosaurus goes by kind of thing. But anyway, but there was no, they just wanted to go there. But now when they go to space, they're experimenting. There's all these other reasons to go there. There's all this science around. Oh,
Mm,
all these zero gravity experiments. Can we grow food?
right.
Can we make perfect? Can we make perfect ball bearings in space? So there's all these other reasons, and that has impacted the vision, or the global vision, of doing something extraordinary just for the sake of doing something extraordinary. So that's what Musk is engaged in. He's just choosing to do this because it's just seems really cool. It's like going to the bottom of the deepest part of the ocean it's more than 6 miles deep.
Yeah.
And there's no good reason to go down there other than it's a really cool thing to do.
Mhm.
And the first time it was done was decades and decades ago.
James
And
Cameron's
now,
incredible for doing that.
pardon me?
James Cameron's incredible for
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah, so he's completely invested in going to the bottom of the ocean and finding cool things down there, because
Yeah.
that's where ships sink. But so there's, and the other reason I think beyond just doing something for the sake of doing it, and hell bent for leather, we don't care. And there doesn't have to be some sort of ulterior motive because it's very, very expensive. And then the people with the purse strings go, well, why are we spending $17 billion to do this when there's nothing really that benefits us other than saying we did something cool?
Well, that is
But
kind of my question, actually,
yeah.
because I love space, big space guy. Watched all the movies.
Hmm.
I but I'm almost because obviously right now the United States, everyone's all up in arms about spending, so they're cutting
Hmm.
spending left and right. And I love space, but my question is, at what point, where is the importance of that in conjunction with absolutely everything else that the United States or Canada or whatever your country is spends? Does it make sense to allocate, like you said, that 16 or 20 billion or whatever it is to that project?
Hmm.
And it's hard for me to say yes or no at this point.
Well, I think that, I mean,
But for
for me,
humanity, yes, right? For
yeah,
humanity, it should be a yes.
I think that there's a certain hubris associated with thinking that we know everything already.
Right.
So we're going to go to Mars and not learn anything.
Mm,
But I think when the United States decided to go to space, or I'm sorry, to go to the moon, there was a clear understanding that we're going to learn something, and we don't know what that is yet, and we don't know how it's going to be useful, but we're going to learn something. So one of the things that resulted from the United States going to the moon, what there was they decided they needed a global communications network. Well, how are we going to do that? Because there was only line of sight.
yep.
And they, in as these astronauts were, Mercury astronauts were going around the world, there was astronauts sent to, or personnel sent to Australia, because on the other side of the earth you can't talk to anybody, and it was all cables through the ocean and line of sight. So they figured, well, we can use a satellite to bounce signals off, and then we don't have to send someone to Australia. Well, that seems like a pretty damn good idea, right?
Yep.
But it came as a direct result of needing to talk to these Mercury capsules orbiting the Earth. And there's a tremendous amount of science today that had to be generated in order for them to go to the moon, which we benefit from. So this idea that, okay, well, there's nothing left to learn, is wrong. Like, one of the most famous physicists said at the end of the most famous physicist said this around 1894. His name was Rutherford.
Hmm.
Said that in physics in 1894, I don't know why anybody would engage in physics. There's nothing left to learn. And at that time, that was the smartest guy on the planet when it came to physics, who apparently, I think, said something pretty stupid, because it turns out there was a lot left to learn. So, and we live in a society and an age where we've accomplished the most amazing things, and technologically unbelievably well advanced, or unbelievably advanced. We understand the universe from incredibly small scales, to subatomic particles, to particles smaller than quarks, or the stuff that quarks are made out of, to the size of the universe. We have this incredible scale,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean we know everything, and there's probably as much or that to
I
learn yet.
I hate when like Neil deGrasse Tyson
Yeah,
and some of these physicists will say there's no life in the universe, like
yeah,
with like 99% certain. I'm like, how can you say that? That part blows my mind
yeah,
because
yeah.
a lot of the, I guess he's not even a physicist. I don't know what he is. But a lot of those guys, maybe it's just like his group, but they all say there's no other life in the universe, and I'm just like, I don't know how you could say that
Well, I
because
think the way.
I believe there's life. So if I
Well, I
believe,
would. Yeah, I would counter his argument by saying that, well, there very well may be other universes. So you might be
mm,
very right, Neil, in this universe, but there's an infinite number of other universes. I mean, in quantum theory, there's the theory of the multiverse, and I
mm-hmm,
mean, it's well established.
yep,
I shouldn't say it's well established, but it's well understood, and there's a theoretical framework for it to exist. And there's good sound logical, there's good sound logical scientific arguments you could make for the existence of the multiverse. So, and of course that concept sort of comes and goes, as it were, as all things in theoretical physics come and go as we learn new things. But my point is that if it's possible to have more than one universe
mm-hmm,
with completely different sets of law, then and not just one but an infinite number of them, then it would be the height of hubris to say that no, there's no other life, because there's an infinite number of possibilities in an infinite different set of physics, right? It doesn't have to be physics as we know it, like this table, this podcast,
Right.
this technology. So, I mean, you'd have to be, I don't know how anyone could, how you could say that with absolute certainty and still call yourself a physicist and not leave yourself open to the fact that you don't know everything.
Right.
So
Then we've come back to that a lot today. You don't know
yeah,
everything.
you don't
So,
know everything. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Interesting.
That's
Interesting.
what Mark Twain said. So I'm going to paraphrase Mark Twain because I don't remember the quote exactly. He said it's not what you know that gets you.
Mhm. It's what you
Oh,
don't.
wait a second. No, I got that wrong. I knew I was going to screw this up. It's not what you don't know that gets you. It's what you know for absolutely sure and certain that kills you. So this idea that I know everything is going to land you, in hell or your grave.
Mark Twain's an interesting character.
Oh yeah. I love Mark Twain. So
Yeah.
he's one of these guys.
We have the
he's
house
one of-
here in it's like 20 miles south of St. Louis,
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
house. It's amazing.
Yeah, he's one of these. He's one of the. I think he was certainly one of America's. If I wouldn't say some of the world's greatest thinkers,
Mhm.
because he had these unbelievable insights, and he could say them in very, very, very succinct ways. And I hadn't blown the quote. Of course, it would have been better, but that's exactly it. It's what you know for certain that will land you in your grave, not what you don't know. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, with that said, all right, I changed my pace. We should be investing in space.
Well,
Because you're right. We have the memory foam mattress because of NASA, right?
correct.
Yeah, so I mean, that right there is enough to be like, all right, we need another 16 billion because maybe they'll make a better mattress or a better pillow for us next time.
Yeah, I think the question is that they shouldn't be spending $16 billion on a memory foam mattress you can get at Sleep Country, right?
So, when it comes to, you said the multiverse, I'm curious.
Yeah.
I have very limited understanding of this. So, a lot of people say with like multiverse, is it an infinite number of me and you, or is
No.
it completely different people? So
Well,
there's only us, right? There's not multiple of us on different timelines. Because I know that's kind of what gets talked about a lot when it comes to like infinite, universes, is that you're also out there infinite amount of times. Which that's the part where I'm like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I think that the issue there is what exactly is infinity,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't really have a good understanding of what infinity is. When mathematically, it means something. So, in the same way, if I said to you, what is 1 divided by 0?
Right.
You go, what is that?
0.
Well, who knows? It's undefined. Like there's no, but you use, it exists everywhere that you look. This idea that you can divide 1 by 0, any number.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't, when it comes to infinity, then there's an infinite number of possibilities. Like there's no end to the possibilities.
Right.
So you could say, because it's infinite, you could say to me, there's no other universe that has me as a clone in it. And I could say, well, there's a possibility, because if you say, well, maybe the best way to say it, give me the biggest number that you can think of.
Let's just
It doesn't matter.
50 trillion, 50
I can
trillion,
add 1
etc.
to it.
Right.
Right. I could just keep adding 1 to it. So
Mhm.
no matter what you say, I can just add 1 to it, and then it changes everything. That's now the new biggest number.
Got it.
But it doesn't imply, the fact that there's a multiverse doesn't mean that there's an infinite number of me. It means that there's an infinite number of different universes. There's no end. You say, well, here's the one that's most different than all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I just add 1 to it. And I've just made, okay, that's the new one. That's the most different. And then you add 1 to it. And then I add 1 and you add 1. And we just keep doing this, this infinite sequence of adding ones. So it means that it simply means that there's no limit to what can exist in that space, in that universe. There's no limit to it. So it could be, doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be, a clone of me, right? That instead of being left-handed like I am,
Right.
Bert's clone is right-handed. But it doesn't have to be that way. But I can imagine, because I can add one, I can always make this small change to make it true, because it's an infinite number of universes. The best way I think to think of it is that they're infinitely varied, and we see that all the time in nature. Actually, every time you look at a tree, um, they're 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 chaotic, and they're chaotic in a fractal sense mathematically, which means that they're self-replicating. So you have a big scale replicates at basically a big scale replicates to a small scale, replicates to a small scale, replicates to the small scale. So like maybe another example would be a coastline. Like you might basically the coastline of well, it doesn't have to be a coastline. It could be just you're measuring the distance around the table. And if I use a ruler that can only measure things to to the accuracy of 12 inches, then the table will have a certain dimension. And if I use one that's 6 inches, it's going to be different dimension, because I have more accuracy, and I can keep getting more and more and more and more and more and more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And the table gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But that doesn't make any sense, right? Because the table, as you and I look at it, is finite. But you can imagine how you can make the table infinitely long by using an infinitely small measuring device. In the same way that if I said to you, I want you to go half the distance to the wall. I'm standing in front of a wall. And you take a step that's halfway, but if mathematically you'll never get there, because you can always divide the distance you have remaining into a smaller distance.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in the same way, it's an infinite number,
Yeah.
right? It gets
Yep.
infinitely big. So we have this concept that mathematically that I can create a situation where you'll never get there. But in the real world, in our world, the physical world, you will get there, because obviously you're going to run into the wall, because my measurement is my scale. Bert, 6 feet, where the scale could be the size of a cork. So
Mm-hmm.
think of infinite as just as varied as you possibly can.
Interesting. Okay. That's a good way to put it. I've always thought about, infinite as just being infinite. And I get that puts it in a lot better perspective. So
Yeah.
last thing before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you, since we're on this topic, the creation of the universe, right? So the universe is always expanding. It's continuously expanding. So what's your kind of theory on the start of the universe? Are you with the Big Bang? Are you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with the Big Bang. That is the science that went into that
Mm-hmm.
is the most tested, the most proven, the most examined bit of science that we've ever produced. So quantum theory, which is deeply embedded into the origin of the universe, and the Big Bang theory is our most successful scientific theory. I mean, the only one it's not even, gravity doesn't even relate, because, gravity is actually relativistic and is embedded in quantum theory, of course. So, but yeah, the universe, scientifically speaking, had to originate it as a point that because, I mean, there's just no other way there's no other way that we can arrive at the physics that we know of today.
Right.
At every scale, like we talked originally about scale. So the Big Bang scale all the way out to the, however the universe is 13.5 billion or 13.5 billion years old. There's no way that you can understand that we can have that insight that we have across that giant scale if it weren't for our understanding of quantum theory. And of course, there's holes. Well, I shouldn't say holes, but again, at the boundary between quantum and relativistic physics, there's friction. And that friction is not well understood, in the same way that when you pour milk into a coffee cup and you look down, you see this turbulence.
Right.
That in and of itself is not well understood. I shouldn't say not well understood, but not well described, mathematically.
Interesting.
But you can see it happening in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm a Big Bang guy for sure. And how it ends is a different question. Because firstly, the second law of thermodynamics or entropy, again, is incredibly well understood. It lies at the very foundation of everything around us. It's why a perfectly good Ferrari, if you just park it out on your driveway, come back 20 years later, all you have is a hunk of, scrap.
Mm-hmm.
Although it started out as a Ferrari,
Yep.
and no one ever drove it, right? And it was perfect. But now 20 years later, it ain't a Ferrari anymore. That's entropy. So How it all ends is open for debate. And there's big questions, like dark matter is a big question yet, and what's going to happen. Quantum gravity is still a big question. So there's lots of interesting things to learn. But the beginning of it all is well understood. The ending is the end is yet to be written.
So there is so actually two things. I've seen a UFO before with my friend. We've talked about it in this
Right?
podcast. I swear to God on my life, would never lie about it. And it was, yes, my senior year in high school. There's a big like lake that connects like all of the subdivisions where my parents lived.
Mm-hmm.
Huge, essentially just like think about like a hot dog ish with lights underneath it. It was there for about 15 seconds and gone. Went up through the clouds and was gone. Weirdest thing of my life. No one believes me. Anytime I say don't believe me, I call my friend that was there with me and he recites exactly what I said to this day. Like I would not bullshit about that. But what I was getting at is with the creation of the universe or how it happened, can we hypothetically look back at that? Like if we have a telescope or whatever it is, can we look almost back at the Big Bang when it happened?
Yeah, you don't have to turn on you don't have to use a telescope. All you have to do is turn on a normal television and turn it to any blank channel. And the noise that you get on your screen, that's the remnant of the Big Bang. It was
Really?
one of them. It's one of the most significant pieces of scientific discovery was the radiation that's left over from the Big Bang has permeates the universe as we know it, and you can see it on a TV screen.
Interesting.
So you don't.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't actually have to have I mean, it's literally looking. You can peer back with a telescope to those close to it. But you need very large telescopes, which is one of the reasons why we put telescopes in space. Very powerful telescopes in space because you're not looking through an atmosphere. You can look very far away. Or very far. You can look very far away temporally. So we're looking way back in time. So yeah, it's you're exactly right. You can actually. I mean, it's one of the reasons I said that particular theory is so well tested because you can peer back at time. But there's a point at which the physics as we know it sorts. It doesn't break down, but the energies get to be so high that we have no way to we have no way to replicate those conditions. Like that's why we build these. That's why they built these giant hadron colliders. There's one in Texas. Is that you get particles going so fast and smash them together that you create energies that get very, very close, or not very close, but get close to the energies associated with the Big Bang. And then you see a completely different set of physics coming or being revealed as a result of that, because the energies associated with those, with that environment is so high that that the different forces that we know them get pushed into one. So electromagnetic gets pushed into the small nuclear force or the large nuclear force or the weak and strong. And so yeah, we're constantly trying to look back at those conditions that were created almost immediately after the Big Bang. So again, I'm a Big Bang believer. I'm a Big Bang guy, and I believe in uniforms. I mean, this might seem very strange, but I had a similar experience as a kid. I saw something that I can't explain. And it was there. It was obviously there. I saw it with my eyes in the same way that I could see a car coming down the road, and I was staring at it, and it was hovering over a farmhouse, and as we were driving by in a car, and this thing appeared over the farmhouse, and then went around the farmhouse. It was a disc basically. And I saw it flat, and then I saw it edge on, and then I saw it, and it's, two-dimensional disc kind of thing as opposed to one-dimensional line. Hovered around the house, went around the farmhouse a couple of times, leveled out, and then just disappeared. So I don't have an explanation for it.
Very weird. Where were you when what part were you in Canada for that?
I was driving from Estevan, Saskatchewan to Regina. So, very close to the U.S. border near Fargo and Minot, North Dakota, on the prairies. And of course, the prairies, there's, if you live in a place long enough, then you recognize everything that should be there.
Mm-hmm.
So this shouldn't be there. Like there shouldn't be things hovering around farmhouses. It wasn't a windmill, let's say.
Yeah,
And it wasn't a horse.
I always think it's either the government or it's entirely not someone from this planet.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's time travel. I don't know if that can ever be a thing legitimately according to math, but what was it? Maybe it's a future self. But I'm like it's very odd.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Like, there's lots of eyewitness accounts, people like fighter pilots, for example, very highly qualified.
We have videos of it. Yeah.
Yeah, videos of it, who are trained to know exactly what should be in that environment and what should not be in that environment. And when that's something that's not in their environment, then these guys and girls, of course, are very well trained to understand or try to understand what's there, friend or foe, at the most basic. But so when you see something hovering in the lake like you've described, that shouldn't be there. You're drawn to it, and you look at it. It should not be there, and there's no good explanation of it. And the fact that it disappears right in front of you is, and there's more than one person, right? It's not just you imagining things. So
well, there's like 10 of us at that stop sign that all literally got out of our cars when it happened.
Yeah,
and I wish, looking back, I would have gotten everyone's contact information that was there and saw it. That was also at the stop sign.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've always thought, like, okay, so me and my buddy, there's definitely other people that saw it that were there at the stop sign at that intersection. We all looked at it. I would love to find those people. I just don't know how. I don't know how.
Yeah, it'd be impossible.
Yeah.
It'd be impossible. But there's lots of things in the world that we can't explain, and one of the good reasons to go to Mars, I suppose, would be to get a deeper and broader, more profound insight into those things that we can't explain.
Yeah.
So it's very. I mean, again, getting back to what Neil deGrasse had said, you have to be. I think it's the height of arrogance to say that we're the only things. I just think that's so.
I think that's
wrong.
kind of his problem, right? I think that's why a lot of people don't like him as much as they could because of his arrogance. Yeah. That's kind of the big thing with Neil.
Yeah.
Bert, where can people find you?
The best way is just bertterhart.com. So from there, there's any number of rabbit holes you can fall into. If whether it's business or whether it's the adventure / exploration stuff, or whether it's all the other things, whether it's citizen scientists or citizen science or the things that we talked about. So that's the easiest way. Just bertterhart.com.
Bert terHart. Sorry, I was saying terHart at the beginning. Bert terHart.
No, that's right. No, you actually pronounced it right. So that's good.
Perfect. Well, Bert, thank you so much for joining us. As always, this is another podcast episode. Thank you for tuning into the St. Louis podcast. Comment, like, subscribe, share it with people. As always, this podcast was recorded at Half Coast Studios here in St. Louis. If you're looking to start a podcast or just need some help with editing and distribution, they can get you taken care of. Go to halfcoaststudios.com. Also, if you need the best damn marketing company on the planet, you know where to find them, Vi.media. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to take care of you. And Bert, of course, thank you for joining us. Please go to his website. We'll have that linked below for you guys all to go to. Thanks again. We'll see you next week. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Hey there, St. Louis podcast listeners. We've got some exciting news from our friends over at Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Lee of Farmers Insurance.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for a job or to own your own business under a brand that everyone and their cousin is familiar with, Mark Lee with Farmers Insurance of St. Louis is recruiting insurance agency owners here in St. Louis for their Farmers Insurance Mentorship Program.
And as many of you are aware, Garrett and I have owned quite a few successful and award-winning businesses over the years. And in a past life, one of those was a farmers insurance agency out of Chesterfield, Missouri.
Eric and I know firsthand how hard it is to start a business under a brand that no one has heard of and convince consumers and businesses to trust that you're an authority figure in your industry.
And as many of you know, we own an award-winning marketing firm, Vi.media, the one that Garrett was just discussing. And building that company's reputation literally took years. We're still building it to this day. And It's been 8 years in the making. However, with the Trusted Farmers Insurance Agency name on the building, we got started when we started our Farmers Insurance Agency. The trust was already built and has been for 96 years.
And if you can't do math, that means Farmers Insurance has been around since 1928. Luckily, you don't need to be a human calculator to get rich as an owner of your very own Farmers Insurance Agency.
Nope. All you have to do is reach out to the one and only Mark Lee, the leader of Farmers Insurance in the greater St. Louis metropolitan area.
That's right. So ensure he continues to sponsor our show and your favorite podcast, the St. Louis Podcast, by quitting your job today and calling Mark Lee. I wouldn't even wait for him to answer your call. Call your boss now, quit, and become your very own business owner.
Visit insurancecareerstl.com. That is insurancecareerstl.com. Should we spell it out?
Yes. It would
INSURANCE, career, CAREER, STL.com, insurancecareerstl.com. Go there now.